Young lad, righteous. War can't back rate. Then craftsman so full of technique. Make him feel like someone good and then alright. Show up at them night, cause we hard clean. Enough of them say them a do it, but them not do it like we. And them know for what them hear about. Warrior they are to what them hear about. Open up it, they can make it hear out. Anybody not the way them a feel clear out. Like switch up.
Hey everyone, today I present What If There Was a Crossover Between Naruto and Bleach, Part 1. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Now please enjoy. Valley of the End. Madara froze, stunned by the sudden coldness in his chest that spread like ice in his veins, weakly grasping at the blade that had run through his heart. So he still had enough chakra for a wood clone. Damned monster. You have changed. You've got your priorities backwards, Madara gasped out, falling to his knees. It will someday lead the village to darkness. Hashirama did not say another word. His face impassive, he held his sword until he felt the weight of Madara's limp torso resting fully upon it. He relaxed his grip on the hilt, sorrow carved into his features as he watched Madara's corpse collapse to his side. The Uchiha's hands were still clasped futilely around the blade in his chest. His eyes, now absent the glowing red irises of his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, stared blankly into space. They remained wide open in defiance until the end. Hashirama did not retrieve his blade. No, that sword had too many memories attached to it. The blood and dreams of too many victims of their decades-long civil war clung to it like a miasma. Hashirama turned and slowly staggered back toward the village. His sword that had seen too much death and destruction would have its last resting place, buried in the heart of his best friend. Such a weapon had no place in the upcoming era of peace that he envisioned. He looked up and around him. All the fire and burning wood from their clash had torn an ugly scar into the land. Thunderclaps and lightning accompanied his trek back to the village. His eyes stung, blurring as he refused to cry. He had to keep moving forward. The path to peace and prosperity could not begin with tears and mourning. He would celebrate Madara's life, not mourn his death. With that thought, a genuine smile tugged at the corners of Hashirama's lips. Madara's sacrifice has finally made their shared dream a true possibility. This was the beginning of a new shinobi era. Madara woke in a haze. He made to get up, but realized he was already standing, his feet not at all sinking into the wet mud beneath them. Strange, he thought, flexing his fingers and noticing how light and numb his body seemed to feel. And then it hit him. Hashirama. The bastard. He scanned his immediate surroundings. It did not take long to notice a very familiar set of red and black armor half buried in the mud. No. Not armor. A body. My body. So I activated Izanagi in time, after all. I don't remember activating the jutsu. His eyes fell on Hashirama's sword embedded in the back of his armor. As he made to reach for it, two things happened simultaneously that caused a sinking feeling to form in Madara's stomach. His hand passed through the hilt of Hashirama's sword, and, as he stepped forward to rebalance himself, he heard a sound of clinking chains coming from his torso. He looked down, and sure enough, a short length of metal chain hung from his chest, seemingly bolted in place with a hexagonal plate. My death should be rewritten. My corpse should have dissipated when Izanagi was activated. What is going on here? Madara reached for the hilt again, and once more his hand passed through. He suspected the truth now, but he didn't want to believe it. He reached for the chain attached to his hand and tugged at it. A jolt of pain racked his body and he grunted in pain. No. He thought. He yanked at it again more forcefully, bracing for the pain, except this time it was infinitely more visceral. It was unlike any pain he had felt before, like it was searing his soul more deeply than even Hashirama's blade had pierced. No. He roared. I used Izanagi. I planned for this. I cannot be dead. He closed his left eye and looked around. His vision was clear. He closed his right. Still clear. The Izanagi required the sacrifice of a Sharingan eye. If he could see clearly, then. Madara channeled his chakra and activated his Sharingan. At that instant, he knew beyond any shadow of doubt that he had, in fact, died. He felt no chakra points flare, and he could see no change in his vision. The Sharingan's failure to activate was confirmed when, upon the reflection on the side of Hashirama's sword, he saw that his pupils remained white, their black irises quivering in anger. Indignation welled up from within him, and with a jolt, the chain on his chest sprouted teeth and started consuming itself. The same searing pain from before overcame him again, doubling in intensity, and though he fought to stay lucid, Madara felt his consciousness slip away. The last thing he remembered before his world faded to black were the echoes of his own screams, reverberating off the rocky cliffs around him. Elsewhere, Takami, an 11th Seeds Hinigami from the 10th Division, was patrolling the elemental nations. He perked up and narrowed his eyes as he sensed the unmistakable pressure of a hollow Suiatsu. It felt incredibly unstable, likely a newborn, but strong enough to warrant taking it seriously. Hollows had become quite common in the last few decades here in the elemental nations, as the constant wars left many dead with lingering regret and attachments. Takami was one of the Shinigami in charge of patrolling and performing Konsoan pluses and purifying hollows in the Land of Fire. He cautiously scoped out the hollow Suiatsu. He had honestly not been very diligent in his duties since he was assigned here, as one of a very exclusive group of lower-seated officers who had awakened a Shikai. Takami felt that it was beneath him to actively hunt and purify regular hollows. This one was different, however, it was much stronger than what he was accustomed to fighting. Plus, he would never hear the end of it from Captain Hitsugaya if he allowed such a hollow to go on a rampage under his watch. He weighed the hollow Suiatsu against his own, and, reassuring himself that it was nothing his Shikai couldn't take care of, Takami took off with a shunpo toward the source. Madara opened his eyes again. This time, his body felt much more substantial, and his thoughts were consumed by ravenous hunger. He felt cold, wet mud on his skin, and noticed he was lying on the ground. As he moved to push himself up, a muscular, clawed limb entered into view. He quickly jumped back to put some distance between himself and this new entity, tripping over backwards as he felt a strange weight behind him. As he fell, he experienced a sharp pain somewhere behind him, in a place he thought shouldn't have belonged to his body. He looked behind and a thick, pasty white tail was crumpled beneath him. Remembering the limb from before, he looked to the spot he had jumped away from. Hashirama's sword was jutting out from his corpse, neither weapon nor body looked like they had been moved at all. Blinking, he made to rub his eyes. That's when Madara noticed his hands. The claws he had seen were his. He had a tail, and the chain at his chest was gone. What is going on here? He muttered to himself, starting as he heard a stranger's voice coming from his throat. It was a high-pitched, double-layered voice that bore no resemblance to his natural rumbling baritone. Before he had time to gather his further analyze his situation, he heard a gust of wind from above him. A flash of steel caught his eye, and only instinct saved his head from being cleaved from his shoulders. He dashed to the side, avoiding death but suffering a shallow cut to his right shoulder. Standing where he was a moment ago was a young man dressed in a black garb. He held a large two-handed sword, which he briefly lowered before pointing two fingers at Madara and shouting, "Sai!" Madara was caught completely off guard as he felt an invisible force snap his arms behind his back, holding them in place. With that, the newcomer raised his sword again and charged. Madara could not move his arms. He tried to jump back, but his new body was too alien to him, and he tripped on his tail again, toppling backward defenselessly. There were a dozen thoughts flooding through his mind at that instant. What is going on? Why do I have a tail? What is this new body? Am I in some kind of genjutsu? Who is this man that is powerful enough to restrain me with two fingers? But as his would-be executioner was almost upon him again, Madara only had time for one word, "Sero." The assailant's eyes widened, and held his sword lengthwise across his body to block a beam of red energy that had fired from Madara's eyes. The sword shattered, and the remaining energy from the blast knocked the man backward, until he tumbled to a stop at Madara's own dead body. He struggled to his hands and knees, heavily burned and bruised from the impact, but still breathing. Madara clutched at his right eye, noting that his arms had been freed. He had meant to use Amaterasu to burn his assailant, but instinct took over and he said Sarah instead. He needed to find out what was going on, and fast. Too many things were happening too quickly for his liking, especially now that he had confirmation that he was dead. Madara closed his eyes, focusing his chakra, before shouting, "Release!" He opened his eyes. His skin was still pasty white. His hands were still claws, and the black-garbed man who was struggling to his knees had collapsed again, holding some strange device and muttering into it. So I'm not in a not a genjutsu. It never hurts to check, but nobody can place a genjutsu on me, Madara thought as he lumbered toward his attacker, picking him up by the front of his shirt. Before he could open his mouth to say a word, the wounded man spat in his face. Madara was stunned. Just kill me and be done with it. I've got nothing to say to a filthy hollow, the man wheezed. Some of his ribs must have punctured a lung. Blood was flowing freely from his mouth, and Madara felt greatly disturbed by a compulsive craving to just take a bite out of the man. He quelled his hunger for now, though, collected himself, and laughed. Just saliva? Of all the oral jutsu I've encountered throughout the years, I can't believe I'm surprised that when someone spits, it's only saliva. Madara set the man down slowly, maintaining eye contact the entire way. He lowered the man carefully, so as not to aggravate his wounds and kill him before he could get any useful information. A few moments passed as he remained quivering where he sat, yet refused to say a word. Madara sighed. How strong do you believe yourself to be? You would attempt to ambush Madara Uchiha? Frowning, he looked closer at the man. What clan are you from? I see no headband on your head. I don't know who you are, Takami finally muttered, and it doesn't matter because you've become a hollow. As he saw the confused expression on the hollow before him, he took a steadying breath, before clarifying, a hollow is a monster formed from tormented souls. They are destructive beings that feed on souls high in spiritual energy. I'm a shinigami, a soul reaper. My job is to aid the passage of souls into soul society and purify hollows like you in preparation for reincarnation. Even as he spoke, he felt his composure slowly returning. This was textbook academy protocol. After all, it was his job to educate the recently deceased as to the proper order of things. A soul reaper? So I truly am dead. I suppose there is no getting around that fact, then, Madara pondered out loud. Then his brow hardened. Glaring down at the shinigami, he spoke again, voice low and menacing, but do you really expect me to believe that you trying to cut my head off is going to aid in this so-called reincarnation? Takami was having trouble regulating his breathing though his injury, and his heart threatened to beat out of his chest. He had called in backup and they should be arriving soon. In fact, he could already feel the spiritual energies of Captain Hitsugaya and Vice Captain Matsumoto exiting a Shinkaman not far from here. They were closing in on them by the second. His distress call had been in regards to a hollow with spiritual power rivaling that of a vice captain, so he was glad that his captain himself had decided to come and deal with this Madara hollow. Nevertheless, they were not here at this very moment, and he was alone. He had to stall. A Soul Reaper's Zanpakuta has specific properties that purify hollows when we slay them. I don't know the specifics, but it is not a permanent death. You will be reincarnated as a new soul without any of your former memories to burden you in the soul society. You speak as if I have no choice in this matter, Madara stated. The shinigami took some time to respond. It is just the way things are. It's the way it's always been. You must feel it, don't you? A hunger for human souls. To protect those that were once dear to you, you must let yourself be purified, he reasoned. At this, Madara burst out into a cackling laughter. Those dear to me? Boy, do not presume to know me. There is nothing left that I hold dear. Madara was a weathered warrior. Decades of fighting experience from when he was but a child had honed his instincts to a razor's edge. He cut himself off before he could say any more, jumping back as the shinigami before him was whisked away by a blur of motion. In the man's place stood an auburn-haired woman with a freckle just below the right side of her mouth. A similar-looking sword to what the injured Shinigami had been using was unsheathed and raised toward him. Behind the woman, a white-haired boy wearing an equally white houri had the man in his arms. Something about the two new arrivals had Madara's instincts screaming at him to escape. The woman before him disappeared into a flurry of strikes. Madara desperately tried to maneuver his way around them, but he was slowly losing ground and had no weapon of his own. This Shinigami woman was fast enough that he could only barely register her movements. More and more cuts streaked across his forearms as he tried to block the woman's strikes. His mind was racing. I will not run. I am the strongest shinobi in the history of the elemental nations. I cannot be defeated again so quickly after losing to Hashirama, he thought as he lashed out at the Shinigami woman. However, that was the opening she needed, as she dodged the swipe of his claws before cutting into his right shoulder further, slicing through the tendons and disabling his arm. Madara hissed in pain. Giving into his instincts again, he slashed at the air, somehow knowing that a portal was going to open. Ducking a horizontal slash from the Shinigami, he rushed forward, grabbing his own corpse with his working arm, before diving into the Garganta. Hueco Mundo, Minos Forest. Madara clutched at his bleeding shoulder as he violently exited the Garganta, crashing into the base of a crystalline-looking tree trunk. His mind was clouded by bloodlust, and the hunger that had been gnawing at him was now threatening to devour his entire being. Eyes darting about, he noticed his immediate surroundings were barren, although his keen hearing could pick up the telltale pattering sounds of what were most likely footsteps. He scowled as he noticed them getting softer, however. He was in no condition to be chasing after prey. He tried to take a bite of the bark on the tree next to him, however howled in pain when it was not the bark that cracked, but his teeth. The object looked like a tree but the outer layer was definitely not bark. The survival skills honed through decades as a shinobi were really being tested now. He looked down at his corpse, now almost completely cold, and a sick feeling settled into his stomach. It was quickly replaced again with a renewed wave of hunger and, trying to rationalize that all he was about to do was eat to survive, he drew Hashirama's sword from his human body and started unbuckling his red samurai armor. As he feasted, Madara felt clarity returning to his brain. He vaguely noticed his body changing form, but all he could truly appreciate upon completing his meal was a blissed absence of the inconsolable desire to feed. As he drew himself up, however, he began to notice a cacophony of snarling and hissing coming from around him. On instinct, he activated his Sharingan and was surprised to sense his eyes actually morphing into the familiar Sharingan state. He surveyed his surroundings. Creatures of various sizes and shapes were cautiously closing in on his position. The only similarity they had with one another appeared to be a circular hole at the center of their chest. Madara reached for his own chest. The wound on his right shoulder was healed, somehow. Maybe it was the flesh I obtained from Hashirama. That accursed senju regeneration. To his surprise, he found that his own chest bore a similar hole, where the chain had been right after he died. This must be where the term hollow comes from, then. Do any of you understand me? Madara asked. He extended his arm and pointed his sword forward. His hand still bore sickly white color, but the claws had morphed back into normal, human-looking fingers now. He concentrated on his rear, the tail was still there. Maybe smaller, though. There was no verbal response, however. A large, green hollow lurched forward face first, jaws agape as if wanting to devour Madara. Compared to the auburn-haired Shinigami woman, it was slow. Madara leapt over its head, slashing down as he passed by, completely bifurcating it. He perched perfectly atop a tree and watched in morbid fascination as other hollows immediately moved to eat the large one he had just killed. What a pitiful afterlife to be in, Madara thought. Is this hell? Were my actions in life so heinous that I leave a world of constant war and must now be subject to one where cannibalism runs rampant? The hollows below him started fighting over the downed one. As chaotic and disgusting as the sight was, Madara had nothing better to do than to simply watch. Hours passed, and Madara was contemplating using the trees to navigate and do some reconnaissance of this place when a wave of pressure shot out from below him. One of the hollows that was feasting on another downed comrade was glowing, and shrinking physically until it took the shape of a white, armor-clad bear with a hole in its chest. All the other hollows took notice, and immediately scattered away. Madara made no attempt to intervene nor move, however the newly transformed hollow raised its head and pointed right toward him. "Come out, little hollow, I can sense exactly where you are." He fired a arrow from his mouth toward Madara, who leapt down from the branch he was on to avoid it. He landed silently, roughly 10 meters in front of the bear hollow. His sword was lowered. "That wasn't a very polite greeting there," Madara said. He noticed his voice was sounding how he remembered it used to sound in life, again. "All I needed to do was to flush you out from your little hiding spot, and now I can eat you and continue my evolution into a vast horde," the bear hollow replied. Madara was on guard. He didn't know how powerful this new enemy was, and he didn't know how powerful he himself was, either. He flexed his chakra and called upon the Mangekyo Sharingan. The bear lunged at Madara. Susanoo. The bear hollow slammed headfirst into a blue, flaming ribcage that had enveloped Madara, and was stopped in its tracks. "Oh, you have some fight in you, little hollow. It's going to be fun beating you down." It drew back and suddenly a stronger wave of pressure began emanating from the bear hollow. Madara could feel it in the air and on his skin, but was not perturbed. Rather, he had more important things to focus on at the moment. "My chakra feels different. It is there, but it feels different in some way that I cannot place." He was drawn out of his thoughts by the bear hollow's bellowing. "Do you feel that, little hollow? Or is the weight of my Ryotsu so heavy that you cannot even move?" Madara cocked an eyebrow. The hollow continued, "I could wipe you from existence with a arrow, but then I'd have nothing to eat. I'm going to apologize in advance because this is going to be messy. I've just evolved into an Ajuchas, after all, and don't know my own power that well." "Is that so?" Madara stated. He had no issue following the bear hollow's movements as it darted about before charging toward him. It was definitely faster than before, yes, but not enough to warrant any alarm. The hollow sank its jaws into one of the Susanoo ribs, and Madara was pleased that it did not break. In fact, he felt barely any drain on his chakra at all. With a mere flare of his will, the rib cage surrounding Madara expanded, and with it, cracked open the bear hollow's jaws. It roared in pain and let go, but before it could recover fully, a huge blue chakra sword pinned it onto the ground by the shoulder. "How about this, Ajuchas? You answer my questions, and then depending on how satisfied I am with your answers, I may let you live." Sarayada 4th Division Barracks. "Takami, report." Hitsugaya's tone was commanding but soft, given the state his 11th seat was in. He was stable, having been treated, but his Ryotsu was low and he wouldn't be in fighting shape for a few more days, at least. Renjaku Matsumoto was beside them, too, having been the only other one to cross blades with the aberrant hollow. "Captain Hitsugaya, sir." Takami saluted, with as much gusto as he could muster. "I was performing my duty in the elemental nation's land of fire, when a series of enormous explosions started ringing out where you found me. I kept my distance, until I felt a hollow's Ryotsu, and then went to purify it. That was the hollow you all saw. I tried to get a jump on it as I sensed it was quite powerful, but he evaded my first blow. I then tried to bind it with a sai but he fired a arrow at me. That was when I paged for help. I then explained the process of purifying souls to the hollow and it seemed quite intrigued by the idea." Hitsugaya nodded. Standard procedure. He was proud that his 11th seat had performed his duties well and stood tall in the face of danger. However, the valley we were in, was it always there? Takami started, Probably, sir. I don't know. Actually now that I think about it, no, that area should have been a grassy plain. The hollow's arrow probably caused it, but I wasn't exactly paying attention to the landscape at that point, you know. He finished with a short chuckle. Why? We flew up to survey the area. There is a small village not far away, but around where we found you, The surroundings were littered with burn marks and the unmistakable signs of a horrific battle. What can you tell me about the elemental nations, Takami? Hitsugaya's brow was furrowed. Takami didn't need to know that the valley was an ugly scar in the earth that had spanned hundreds of meters, and that Hitsugaya had spotted uprooted trees and debris kilometers away from the area. Whatever was fighting there had enormous destructive power, possibly on par with, or even above that of a captain. If the Hollow had fired a arrow powerful enough to cause such damage, Hitsugaya himself may have been hard-pressed to survive without being in Bankai, much less in 11th seat. From what I've heard in passing, the Land of Fire where I've been stationed in the past 3 years used to be a war-torn country. However, I have never known it to be anything but peaceful, and only low-level hollows have ever shown up there. I've had no issues dealing with anything until now. The most I've seen are some acrobatic humans who are good at martial arts and throwing knives. Did you have much interaction with them? Hitsugaya prodded. No, sir. I did not have a gig, so could not interact with them. I honestly don't know too much about the inner workings of that place, but there is a village called Konoha near where you found me. I'm sure you could find all the information you need there. Hitsugaya nodded. Thank you for your service, Takami. You're hereby granted 3 months of paid leave. Vice Captain Matsumoto and I will handle the rest. Takami perked up at that, and sat up straighter. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. And held a salute as his superiors left his room. Renjuku, Hitsugaya started as they walked back to the Squad 10 barracks. I wasn't paying much attention because I was taking care of Takami at the time, but did anything stand out to you as you fought that hollow from earlier? Renjuku made a pose as if recalling something interesting, but then shrugged and said, nope. It was stronger than an 11th seat for sure, since it blocked a few of my strikes, but if it hadn't escaped in that Garganta I would have purified it within the next 15 seconds 30 tops. Did you get a good look at the body it took when it escaped? Nope. It was wearing red armor, black hair, a sword through the heart. Male, I think. Why are you so concerned by a minor hollow? It's not even a Minosgrand. I'm sure it's no big deal. Hitsugaya was silent for a while, but eventually just sighed and said, I'm probably just overthinking. When we were shunpoing there I thought the landscape looked like it had been blasted open by a huge arrow, but Takami wouldn't have survived if it had been the same hollow that did that. Get some rest, we'll request use of some Gigai and have a look at this Konoha in the next few days. You know hollows always go back to where they have some emotional attachment. I'm sure this one will pop up soon and we'll have it dealt with in no time. Oh Captain, you need to lighten up a bit. Renjuku moved in and pulled Toshiro into a tight hug, earning herself a grunt of displeasure. But then again, you know I'd never refuse a trip to the world of the living. Hueco Mundo, above the sands. Madara bounded across the desert with his Sonito, as he had recently learned it was called, once more dressed in his old red armor. He much enjoyed the sound of the low sonic boom that accompanied his every step. It had been a few days since his arrival in Hueco Mundo, and his body had more or less reverted to its previous, human form, now. The bear hollow had been quite useful. Too useful, in fact. Its fate was sealed once it told Madara that hollows evolved by consuming other hollows until they became humanoid hollows known as Vostlords. It was now a part of Madara, having been consumed once Madara figured it had told him all it could about this place. He had been somewhere known as the Minos Forest, where newborn hollows often find themselves through their first usage of a Garganta. He had learned about hollow evolution, and that he himself was probably either an Ajuches or already a Vostlord, due to his lucid mind. The difference in his chakra he felt as he activated his Sharingan was probably because hollows used something called Ryotsu, or spiritual pressure. It was released predominantly from 2 vents on each wrist, and the measure of a being's Ryotsu was often an indicator of its power. Madara still had no idea how to sense his own or anybody else's, though. He was an expert sensory shinobi in regard to chakra, but he had yet to acclimatize to the feeling of Ryotsu. However, he had experimented with much of his old jutsu and found that he still had access to everything he remembered. In fact, Whether it is because of this new Ryotsu he had, or because he had consumed some of Hashirama's flesh, or even because of the hollows he had consumed, he felt he had more reserves than he ever did when he was alive. He looked down at himself. His tail was all but gone, and his proportions were perfectly human and normal. Suddenly, as he listened to the constant crunching of sand beneath his feet, a flash of inspiration occurred to him. Drawing upon his reserves, Madara took a deep breath, then roared, "Fire release, great fire annihilation." Sprawling waves of crimson rolled across the empty desert of Wego Mundo. Individual tongues of fire formed dragon heads as they rolled forward. Madara kept the jutsu going for a while longer, feeling the drain on his chakra, until he released the jutsu, satisfied that he was no less powerful in his current form than he was in life, and definitely had more reserves than before. However, that had not been the only point of his jutsu. Madara leaned down at the now glassed sand, and a stranger stared back at him. "I don't know what I was expecting." He reached up to touch his mask. He had known that just like all the hollows he had seen and eaten, there was a mask on his face, but although he could feel it before, this was the first time he had actually seen what it looked like. Bone white, with rings expanding out from the center, it was almost exactly like a 3 Tomoe Sharingan eye. 2 of the Tomoe served as openings when his actual eyes were, and the third was set high on his forehead. A sense of pride welled up from within Madara. Even in death, his Uchiha blood ran thick enough to manifest in the form of his hollow mask. However, his musing was cut short by the sound of rushing water. "Water? Tiburon!" He heard a cry somewhere in the distance. It was echoing off the reflective surface of the glass left behind by his great fire annihilation, making it hard to locate. Sharingan. With his ocular jutsu active, it only took an instant to locate the source of the voice. A blonde-haired, tan-skinned woman stood in the skies above him. Her right arm was extended, holding what appeared to be a broad knife with a hollow center. A tidal wave had met the last dregs of his fire jutsu and was containing it in the distance. Madara cursed to himself. Although he had played around with standing in the air using Ryotsu, he didn't quite trust himself with aerial combat just yet. "Who are you and what do you want?" Madara shouted. Madara saw her mouth move, but amidst the roaring waves and the steaming water, he couldn't hear clearly. "I guess I'll have to bring her down here, then. Why don't you come down and we can have civilized conversation? Are you a Vasto Lord? I haven't seen another humanoid hollow here yet." The woman didn't move, and Madara was getting annoyed. He was Madara Uchiha, nobody simply ignored him. Fire style, dragon fire jutsu. Madara released his technique. He had intended it to scare the woman out of the skies, and so was completely ill-prepared when, through the roar of his flames he heard, "Cascada." Although he was still looking upward, he barely had time to register what was happening when the skies turned into an ocean, smothering his flames and collapsing upon him. Wego Mundo, above the sands. Haribel set herself down atop a large outcrop that was tall enough not to be swallowed up by her cascada. She had reverted to base, but had still put a significant amount of power into the attack. She had never been one to strike first, but this hollow had been wreaking havoc in this region of Wego Mundo over the last few days, and it had the audacity to indiscriminately attack her Froxion with some sort of fire technique. As powerful as the hollow was, and as useful as it may become to Lord Aizen's plans, she did not particularly fancy the idea of another Noidra or Grimmjow joining their ranks. She watched the sand hungrily drink up her cascada, until all that was left before her was wet sand and fog from where her water met the hollow's flames. She turned to leave, but was stopped by a sudden outpouring of Ryotsu strong enough to make her breath hitch. She berated herself for not picking up on the odd Ryotsu signature earlier. She had thought her foe vanquished, but its spiritual energy was different to that of most hollows, and almost blended in with the feel of Wego Mundo's natural energies. The waves of killing intent pouring from the sands could not be mistaken, though. The hollow was alive. More than that, he was angry and wanted blood. An enormous, blue skeletal fist burst through the wet sand of Wego Mundo, before slamming back down with an open palm. The sand gave slightly under the weight, but mostly held as a skeletal figure cloaked in blue. Ryotsu clawed its way out of the sand. Haribel drew her sword back. Ola Asuli. Her golden spiritual energy enveloped her blade. She held it there, scanning the skeletal monstrosity for any weak points. And then she saw it, as its torso rose up from the sand, the hollow from before appeared, protectively encased within what appeared to be the skeleton's rib cage. Haribel fired. A golden beam of energy shot out at the hollow. He made no effort to dodge or block, instead leaning forward to take the attack head-on. It was a mistake, when the ribcage cracked and the remaining energy from Haribel's blast knocked the hollow out of his skeletal avatar. To his credit, he righted himself midair and touched down on his 2 feet, kicking up a cloud of sand as he used it to absorb the momentum from the attack. To shatter the absolute defense of my Susanoo is no mean feat, woman, the hollow declared arrogantly. His eyes flashed and the skeletal figure, still half buried in wet sand, dissipated. I am Madara Ukika. State your name and business now, or you will know quickly just how outmatched you really are. If he was injured by Haribel's Ola Asul, he did not show it. He took this opportunity to get his bearings on his opponent. The upper half of her face was unmistakably human, although her features from nose to sternum were obscured by a white crop top jacket. Haribel raised her voice to project across the distance. Dear Haribel, Espada number 3. I've been keeping an eye on you since your spiritual pressure appeared in Weko Mundo. I would have been content to let you be, had you not attacked my Froxion unprovoked. Despite the increase in volume, her voice was steady, and held no trace of ire or strain. Almost apathetically, she pointed her sword at him. Madara lowered himself to a battle stance in response as he noticed Haribel's blade glowing golden again. However, when she did not immediately fire, Madara responded, I do not know who you are talking about, but I have not struck first at anybody. No sooner had the words left his mouth did he remember the tidal wave stemming his great fire annihilation jutsu in the distance. Recognition dawned on his face as Madara looked to the direction he remembered seeing the wave. His Sharingan could pick out a group of figures there. Suddenly feeling sheepish, Madara was lost for words. He could not apologize, no, he could not even remember the last time he had genuinely apologized to anybody. His pride would not allow him. However, he also was not so black-hearted he would randomly attack innocent strangers, as innocent as hollows could be, anyway. I was testing my jutsu. I did not intend for anyone to be caught up in it, he finally settled on saying. They are still alive, are they not? They don't seem terribly hurt. He wasn't about to tell the woman he couldn't sense Ryotsu. Haribel had presented herself to him as a foe, after all. He gathered his chakra into his eyes and activated his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. He did not want to be caught unprepared if Haribel decided to press her attack. She could break through his imperfect Susanoo, and if the scope of her water jutsu was any indication of her true strength, then she was powerful enough for him to keep his guard up. Haribel scowled at him, raising her blade above her head. You talk as if to disarm me, while you gather Ryotsu and prepare to attack. Do you take me for a fool? Madara smirked. It would appear all you hollows know how to do is bluster and pick fights with strangers. You wish to do battle completely unprotected in your flimsy clothes? Be my guest, you will not find me easy prey, he challenged. With a titanic sonito that blew away all remnants of steam on the battlefield, Haribel appeared before Madara, and slashed downward. His Mangekyo saw the strike coming, though, and he raised his sword to defend. The two blades made contact for the barest of moments before Madara snapped in two. Hashirama. Even in the afterlife you continue to vex me. He ducked, planted his left hand in the sand and spun around it, simultaneously avoiding Haribel's slash while driving a shard of broken sword into her exposed side with the front of his right foot. The shard struck true, but bounced off the espada's skin with a sound like clanging steel, and the other end punctured through Madara's armored foot. Eyes wide, Madara reached inside his armor with his spare hand, but cursed as he remembered exhausting his entire arsenal against Hashirama. Haribel hesitated for the briefest moments before bringing her sword across again toward Madara. Nothing that had just happened had been within her expectations. She didn't truly expect that she was too fast for Madara in her base state, so was only mildly surprised when he raised his Zanpakuto with plenty of time to block. But her surprise turned into utter shock when the sword that came to meet Tiburon shattered with absolutely no resistance. Then her shock had morphed into fear for the briefest moments when Madara had not only reacted fast enough to dodge her slash through his guard, but also had the dexterity to catch a shard of his broken blade with the flat of his foot, and drive it into her side. The fear then evaporated into confusion as she barely even felt the pressure of the blade against her gyro when a sickening crush accompanied by a grunt of pain saw the other end pierce through Madara's foot. Susanoo! Madara roared. There was no time and he didn't have the balance to evade Haribel's second strike. Tiburon was stopped mere inches from separating Madara's legs from his torso. The same blue glow of the skeleton from earlier took form around Madara, but this time, fibers of pure energy resembling flesh and sinew snapped into place, pushing her sword back. Ola Asuli! She fired, the blast punching through some flesh that was quickly regenerating. Haribel retreated a short distance with a sonito, watching as the blue, flame-clad skeletal figure was now resembling a flayed human body. The energy fibers were still growing and snapping into place around the muscles of its arms. Not wanting to see where this could lead, Haribel charged up a arrow within her sword, and slashed toward the monstrosity in a huge vertical arc of golden energy. Madara himself had gotten up one knee, and was pulling his sword shard out of his foot. Haribel's arrow crashed into where Madara was suspended near the creature's neck. Madara's Susanoo staggered back from the blast, but Haribel wasn't done. She knew it was still standing. She slashed again and again, two more wide arrow blasts crashing into the Susanoo in an X pattern and forcing it onto its back. A huge cloud of dust was kicked up as it fell. Haribel gritted her teeth. Cascada. She poured more of her Ryotsu into the ability this time, and it was as if the heavens themselves opened their floodgates onto the deserts of Wekomundo as a torrent of water pelted down onto the downed Susanoo. As the dust and water settled, Haribel stood in the air, sword raised and panting heavily. She did not have to go into Resurrection, but this Madara was certainly an incredibly fast and skilled hollow. It was a pity that his gyro was positively frail. First you try to give orders to my Fraction, and now you almost kill them and your pathetic girls in the same breath you claim to protect them? A scornful, gravelly voice boomed. Baragan floated up to Haribel on his throne, flanked by his Fraction Gyo and fine daughter. He surveyed the huge lake that Haribel's cascada had formed, and scoffed. Was all this really necessary for a mere nameless hollow? Haribel did not deign to reply to the jab, instead asking, "Are Apache, Mila Rose and Sunday to Sunday safe?" Baragan waved a hand in dismissal. "Charlotte, Choning and Nerj have them. They are on their way back to Las Noches for treatment for the burns." Before Haribel could say her thanks, a ripple formed on the surface of the lake, and 4 dragon heads formed of water rocketed toward the group. Haribel made to counter, but Baragan put his hand out first. The air before them flickered and the water dragons evaporated before they could touch them. He scoffed again. "You're losing your touch, Haribel." As they looked on, from the lake rose a colossal head, atop which Madara stood with his arms crossed. "I must admit I underestimated you. I appear to be learning something new every day here in Wekomundo. Forgive me for holding back." However, his eyes were a haunting reflection of his perfect Susanoo's, blazing crimson orbs bearing down at Haribel and the hollows from its full, mountainous height. The Tengu-like avatar had 4 enormous arms, and 2 katana half its body length sheathed at its hip. The lake was evaporating rapidly upon contact with its Ryotsu. Madara unsheathed one of his Susanoo's chakra blades and strode toward them. Each thunderous step reverberated through the ground as if it were a temperamental earthquake. "Playtime is over." Despite his words, however, Madara was furious. From the sounds of things the old man on the throne was Haribel's superior, and he had no idea what his abilities were. Haribel was proving to be a much tougher opponent than he had anticipated. He had to end things quickly before they got out of hand. Normally Madara enjoyed coaxing the best techniques out of his foes before crushing them, as only Hashirama had ever been able to even remotely challenge him. Since becoming a hollow, however, Madara was slowly starting to think that his shinobi powers, while still powerful, were definitely not without peer. He still had a few more tricks up his sleeve, though. "Hunt, Tiburon!" Haribel cried. Her body was enveloped in golden light, and another tidal wave crashed into Madara's perfect Susanoo. Madara didn't even falter in his forward march as he swung his Susanoo's sword at Haribel. The old man seemed content to watch, although he had now sent his two aides away. Madara didn't even see Haribel dodge before he felt an impact hit the head of his Susanoo. He looked to the side just in time to see Haribel disappear again before bolts of water once more splashed against his perfect defense. "I can't catch her like this, but she can't damage me." Madara stopped, stabbed his Susanoo's sword into the mud and crossed its arms. Time to try a few new jutsu. Wood release, Great Forest Jutsu. Thick, snaking roots erupted from the mud, reaching toward both remaining hollows on the battlefield. They wrapped around the old hollow's throne without difficulty, but they were too slow to catch Haribel, darting around in the sky. "Barragan!" Haribel cried, fighting off the roots as she made her way toward his wooden prison. "Save your breath," Barragan sneered, his voice muffled but commanding nonetheless. "This level of pathetic attack is not even worth dodging." Even as he spoke, the roots were blackening, before withering away into dust. Freed, Barragan himself finally rose, smashing his throne and drawing the axe that was hidden within it. "Although you look like you've got your hands full here, Tear." Madara could not believe his eyes. Were the greatest shinobi jutsu truly so weak here? Not only did his taijutsu backfire spectacularly against Haribel, but ninjutsu on the scale of Hashirama's would release was so mundane that this Barragan could will it away with a mere thought. He roared as he drew his Susanoo's second blade up and brought them both down at Barragan. The old hollow raised his axe to intercept them. Instead of slicing the old hollow in two or at least forcing him into the ground, Madara's Susanoo blades were stopped, and they suddenly dimmed, threatening to dissipate. Furious, he fed more chakra into it, but for some reason he was hemorrhaging chakra just trying to push against Barragan. No matter how much energy he fed it, though, it continued to dim. He lurched forward as the blades dissipated and his Susanoo overbalanced. Quickly catching himself, Madara leapt back to create distance. There was no way for him to win like this. He was completely out of his league, here. Barragan was impressed. The Espada rankings were certainly going to change after Madara was brought into the fold. "Madara Uchiha," he said. "There is no need for this. Haribel is just too overprotective of her subordinates, you see." Haribel narrowed her eyes at that, but did not interrupt. "Let us put down our weapons and have a civil conversation. You are clearly unaccustomed to your powers. Swear fealty to me and I shall guide you in your evolution as a hollow." Haribel scoffed. "Just because Lord Aizen is not here doesn't mean you get to make offers like that." "Silence. You would be dead if not for me. With Aizen and his lackeys and the Soul Society twiddling their thumbs, and our great Premier only ever asleep, it falls upon me to rule. Just like it always has." Barragan flared his Ryotsu. Unlike Haribel's golden energy, his held a deep, purple hue. Madara felt cold and smothered just looking at it. However, Madara was not going to bow to anybody. He had had enough of this. Since consuming Hashirama's flesh, he had awakened one more power that he had yet to use. Closing his eyes, he gathered his remaining chakra. He would have to plan carefully to ensure that he alone would be leaving this battlefield alive. In a flash, he reignited his Susanoo's sword, delivering an overhead swing at Haribel. As predicted, she dodged downward, right into the grasp of his Great Forest Jutsu. Just like before, Barragan did not bother dodging. Before the roots could wither away this time, however, Madara lunged forward, dropping his swords and grabbing them with two hands each. When Madara's eyes opened again, his Mangekyou Sharingan had morphed into a series of rings reminiscent of his hollow mask. This was the first time he would be trying any Rinnegan jutsu, but... "Barragan. Above us," Haribel breathed, as a shadow fell upon them. A meteor the size of Las Noches broke through the clouds, hurtling down toward them. Madara felt his Susanoo threatening to fade, but he funneled as much chakra into it as he could, feeling his reserves nearing empty. He just had to hold on until the meteor fell, and then he would escape back into the elemental nations with the Garganta. His Susanoo and would release should keep the two restrained long enough to ensure their death. He was wary of what he had just heard, though. Who was Aizen? Aizen and lackeys, plus somebody else called the Primera, are all supposed to be above Barragan? He needed to hide and master his new form and the Rinnegan. He had to become even stronger to stand a chance in this world. Rot, Aragante. An explosion of purple energy shot out from Barragan, melting through Madara's wood style and his Susanoo's hands. Haribel leaned away, trying to shield her face on instinct as it passed dangerously close to her en route to intercept the meteor. What began as a concentrated stream spread into a blanket of thick miasma as it made contact with the meteor. At first it seemed as if it had stopped the meteor, causing Madara to curse under his breath, but as the miasma spread, Madara audibly sputtered as he realized that the meteor was still falling. It was just falling and disappearing into the miasma. His Susanoo failed at that moment and he crashed into the mud. Scrambling an arm free, he tore open a garganta and crawled in. As he spared a glance back at where Haribel and Barragan were, he swore he had locked eyes with the Grim Reaper himself. Hueco Mundo, above the sands. As Barragan's Respira rotted away the last remnants of Madara's meteor, both espadas surveyed the battlefield in a few moments of tense silence. The Susanoo had evaporated almost immediately after Madara's garganta closed. The only evidence it was ever there was in the form of gigantic footprints in the muddy sand. Huge masses of green roots snaked across the land, culminating in a tangle of twisting vines that had reached toward the sky, solidifying around where they stood in the air. The vines around Barragan had already been decayed by Barragan's Respira. Without a word, he slashed open the vines binding Haribel. "Are these twigs really so tough, Tyr?" he taunted. "You have my gratitude," Haribel replied, reverting back to her base form again. She was moderately embarrassed for being ensnared the way she was, but her powers weren't as good to match against Madara as Barragan's obviously were. The Segunda Espada followed suit in reverting, grunting affirmation as he took stock of the aftermath of their battle against Madara. "Where would you place him among the Espada?" he asked. He already had an idea, but he was curious about Haribel's opinion, first. "I don't know. He was strange. I don't know if I could keep up with his speed in my resurrection, but he is faster than my unreleased form. His Yarrow is either defective or he doesn't know how to use it properly, but very weak, at any rate." Then Haribel frowned, looking at the footprints below her. "I broke his Zanpakuto in my first strike, so I don't know what that huge blue avatar was, but there was no indication of him having used resurrection." At this, Barragan grew alarmed. "He forced us both into resurrection in his own unreleased form?" Then a more pressing thought occurred. "Wait, Zanpakuto? So he's one of Aizen's rank higher? Why have we not been informed of someone so powerful?" He growled. He wasn't sure if even Yami could have stood up against the power of the blue avatar in a head-on confrontation. As if reading his mind, Haribel pondered, "I don't know, do you think he could be above even Yami Zaira?" Barragan turned toward her, flaring his Ryotsu. "Perhaps, but he was nothing against me. You saw it in his eyes, the fear reflected from within them when he made his escape." Haribel quirked an eyebrow at Barragan's implication. She knew how prideful the former God King of Hueco Mundo could be, but his arrogance could still get on her nerves. "You speak as if you should be the Cerro Espada, Barragan. And you speak as if you believe Yami could actually pose a threat to me?" Barragan countered. Haribel inclined her head, he had a point. But she did not back down. "What about Stark, then? You would question his place as the Primera." Barraga's voice grew low at this. "All Aizen and his stupid draw cares about his Ryotsu. My power is absolute. You of all people should know this. Especially now. Now return your focus to the matter at hand." He gestured around him. Not wanting to continue this conversation further, Haribel relented. So what are your orders now, then, your majesty? She emphasized your majesty to let him know she was not impressed. Go after Madara. Haribel started. What? Don't make me repeat myself, Tear. Go after him. He has foolishly spent his Ryotsu against my Respira, so he won't be in any condition to fight for some time. More importantly, he has seen both of our resurrection, and if he is captured by the Shinigami, he could reveal the existence of his rank higher in Weko Mundo. Haribel conceded Bargain's point. Very well. At least he hasn't covered his tracks very well, she mused as she concentrated on Madara's unique Ryotsu signature, slashed open a garganta with Tiburon, and stepped inside. And when I find him, should I kill him? No. There is too much potential in that hollow to just snuff it out now. Bargain chuckled. Besides, are you truly so anxious to be caught by his trees again, little girl? I won't be there to save you this time. Haribel closed her eyes and sighed. He'd had countless centuries to learn restraint and tact, but no. The old bastard always had to have the last word. Land of Fire, Konohigakure, the village hidden in the leaves. It had taken a week for clearance to be granted to Toshiro Hitsugaya and Renjaku to bring Gigai into the Land of Fire. The request was deemed medium-low priority by the Central 46, but Hitsugaya could not shake the feeling that there was more at play here than a simple, albeit powerful hollow, thus pushing for the request to be granted with haste. He and his vice-captain were presently being led to a meeting with the Hokage, or village leader, by a young boy. As they approached a set of double doors, the boy stopped and saluted the guards. Lord Hokage, your visitors from the Soul Society are waiting outside. Thank you, Hiruzen. You can bring them in. Tobrama's voice echoed through the doors. As they parted, a surprised Hiruzen Sarutobi led the captain and vice-captain of Squad 10 into the Hokage's office. Sensei? Where is the Lord Hokage? Tobrama sighed. You know how he is these days. He's at the valley, overlooking those statues he's so adamant about erecting. But anyway, I forget my manners. He beckoned Hitsugaya and Matsumoto forward. Please, sit. I am Tobrama Senju, the younger brother of the Hokage. Though he is the leader of our village, a great tragedy has recently befallen our village, and he is otherwise preoccupied. I assure you that I speak on his behalf, and with equal authority. Hiruzen nodded his support. Yes, Tobrama is my sensei, and he always takes care of a lot of the paperwork when the Hokage is busy. Then he leaned toward Renjaku, whispering, it might be better that you're talking to Tobrama, anyway. He's always been more serious than his brother. At that, Tobrama smiled. Don't let Hashirama hear you say that. He mightn't go easy on you in his next training session if he finds out. At that Hiruzen paled, and nodded quickly. Why yes, sensei. Renjaku laughed at the little exchange, but Hitsugaya cleared his throat, and drew the conversation back to the topic of their visit. Yes, about this tragedy that you speak of, is it related to the large valley that had opened up a week ago? Tobrama's smile faltered, but he saw no reason to hide the truth. Maps were being redrawn as they spoke, and the finishing touches on the mountain-sized statues of Hashirama and Madara would be completed soon. Yes. May I know your names and village? There are maps being redrawn by our scouts at this very moment. We were planning to distribute them and bring the shinobi world up to speed as to current events at the next Cage Summit. Renjaku elbowed her captain in the shoulder. Please forgive us, Tobrama. My name is Renjaku Matsumoto, and this is my captain, Captain Toshiro Hitsugaya. He's always too serious and likes to get straight to business. Yes, thank you, Renjaku. Hitsugaya scolded. Now what can you tell me about this tragedy? What happened? Have there been people going missing and reports of attacks by invisible creatures? Tobrama raised his eyebrows. So the young boy is the superior officer here? He thought. Before I answer any of that, from which nation do you hail? And what business do you have with the Hidden Leaf? Toshiro fidgeted. He wasn't good at this. We come from the Suraida in Soul Society, as we've already told Hiruzen over there. We have come to investigate the potential presence of a powerful, spiritual entity that feeds on human souls, and have reason to believe that this entity is responsible for the destruction near your village. Brahma's face remained expressionless throughout this. We have come to remove that entity from this world, and help protect your village from its hunting spree. Ah, I'm afraid you are mistaken, Captain Hitsugaya. The destruction was wrought by a rogue shinobi that attacked our village last week. He has been dealt with, and the calamity he brought with him has been safely sealed. There have been no unexplained disappearances or any supernatural occurrences reported. In fact, aside from the recent battle, our village has been the vision of peace for years now. Brahma replied evenly. By dealt with, do you mean someone was killed? Renjaku asked. I'm afraid so. He was a threat to our hard-won peace, and could not be allowed to continue in his path of hatred and destruction. Then I'm afraid it is you who is mistaken, Brahma. Hitsugaya hung his head, his voice soft but leaving no room for argument. We are soul reapers. Shinigami. When certain people die with enough emptiness in their hearts or unfinished business in life, they do not immediately pass on to the next life. Instead, they remain in the world of the living as hollows, monsters that are forever cursed to prey on living souls to satisfy their insatiable hunger. Hitsugaya's eyes were still downcast, but Renjaku, who was looking at Brahma the entire time, saw his eyes widen and suck in a quick breath, his fingers curling into fists and knuckles turning white with strain. Hitsugaya continued, we found one such being in the aftermath of the site of the battlefield outside your village. It wounded one of our men who'd been stationed here to help souls cross over, then it escaped. We fear it will return with a vengeance. I see. Brahma's demeanor had changed completely. He looked outside the window at the setting sun. Although I have many questions regarding what you've just told me, I believe this is a matter that requires the Hokage's presence. If you would please come with me, I can lead you to him immediately. Valley of the End. Madara collapsed out of his garganta. Chakra exhaustion. Madara cursed to himself, laying on the ground gasping for breath. The sky was aglow with stars, not a single cloud in sight. Expanding his senses outward, he confirmed that he was alone in the immediate vicinity. He closed his eyes, deep in thought. Baragan's ability was some kind of decay or corrosion. He hadn't seen the old hollow move in the entire fight except to rise from his throne and retrieve his axe. He had no idea how strong or fast he was, except that he was strong enough to block a full-powered strike from the perfect Susanoo. But something wasn't right. The Susanoo's strike had slowed before it met the axe, and by the time the two weapons clashed, Madara had felt a considerable drain on his chakra. It was as if his chakra points were emptying out into a bottomless void. Some kind of absorbing ability, then? Madara was more on guard now than he had been since the war with the Senjus. He could not afford to get arrogant and complacent in this no word of Shinigami and hollows. He lay still for a few minutes, his breath finally returning to him. His eyelids felt like lead, but he couldn't afford to pass out here in the open. Dragging himself upright, he momentarily forgot his exhaustion when he spotted his gun butt and scythe planted into the ground, behind a life-sized wooden replica of himself in full Uchiha armor. Limping toward them, he stopped to read the inscription at the replica's feet. Madara Uchiha. Visionary, founder, and friend. Hashirama Senju. It was unmistakably Hashirama's messy handwriting, inscribed on a plaque of wood that he had no doubt conjured himself. In fact, the entire Madara replica looked as if it had sprouted from the ground. Hashirama. It was then that Madara saw in the distance two enormous silhouettes of himself and Hashirama carved into the cliff face. You sentimental fool, he thought, though he felt a tickle of warmth welling up from within. Much as he loathed Brahma's plots and schemes, as well as the ungrateful village folk, he had never truly borne ill will toward Hashirama. Despite everything Madara had said to his old friend in anger, Hashirama was a man who had bared his heart time and time again to win Madara's trust. He hobbled forward, grabbing onto the handles of his fan and scythe. He took a moment to steady himself before drawing them from the ground and sheathing them behind his back. The familiar weight gave him a measure of comfort he had not realized was missing since Hashirama's sword broke against Haribel's. That had been a baffling series of events for Madara. He easily found an opening and exploited it in the initial seconds of their clash. For all intents and purposes it should have ended then and there with Haribel bleeding out on the ground, skewered through the side, but instead, the sword shard against her skin had sounded, and felt, like tempered steel. As if on cue, a Garganta appeared mere meters away from him, and Haribel gracefully stepped out. She spotted him instantly, though after eyeing him up and down and taking in his condition, did not even draw her sword. "Madara," she said. "Haribel." Madara spat, scoffing humorlessly. "What devilish timing you have, I could almost believe I had summoned you with my thoughts." Of all the possible responses she had prepared herself for, Madara's words were the last thing she could have expected. "You were thinking about me?" she asked, somewhat perturbed. Madara pinched the bridge of his nose. "I could have worded that better. You mistake intent. I was merely reviewing the details of our battle." He drew his fan and sighed. "Are you here to continue it?" "No. I'm here to apologize for attacking you. Baragan and I are impressed by your combat prowess and Ryotsu, and would like to invite you to Lost Snow Chase to meet Master Aizen." "And if I refuse?" Madara had no intention of willingly walking into a den of potential enemies more powerful than Baragan. "You will not." Haribel raised her right arm, deliberately slipping a finger into the ring at the handle of her sword. Her wrist was relaxed, but Madara knew that an expert swordsman could draw and strike from that position with deadly speed. Madara was at a disadvantage here. He was already feeling the symptoms of chakra exhaustion, and his mobility was hampered by the wound in his foot. But then something occurred to him. "You should have stayed in Wekamundo where you had the home field advantage, Haribel." Madara grinned. "You are not the only demon I can summon." With that, Madara gathered his last vestiges of chakra, and activated his Mangekyo Sharingan. Clasping his hands together, he slammed them onto the ground, and a summoning circle swiftly took form around him. "Come, Kyubi!" he roared. Konohagakure, Hokage's quarters. Hashirama, Tobirama, Toshiro and Ranjaku sat in Hashirama's living room. The Hokage was deep in thought. Hitsugaya and Matsumoto had spun him a tale so tall that he would have personally knocked them out and locked them in the clinic for a psychological evaluation. Would have, had they not proven their words with demonstrations of Kido, and if he hadn't watched a cup of tea pour itself, disappear into thin air, and then seen Ranjaku's lifeless, breathless body suddenly pop upright again. "So you're trying to tell me that the hollow you saw escaped with Madara's body, which is consistent with us not being able to locate it anywhere," Hashirama muttered to himself, "and that this hollow is likely Madara himself, plotting to come back and take revenge by eating our villagers." "Something like that," Hitsugaya clarified. "Newborn hollows normally don't have memories of their past life, instead, they function mostly off of instinct. However, they do tend to be drawn to places with high spiritual energy, and this village would fit that classification. So something I can't even see is most likely lurking around here, just waiting to prey on my people?" Hashirama's brow furrowed. Before Hitsugaya could respond, he and Ranjaku suddenly jerked their heads toward the Valley of the End. "It's a faint signature, but I think he's back," Ranjaku said. Hitsugaya nodded. "Yes, it's faint, but if we can feel it all the way out here it can certainly be considered an above-average hollow. I do believe the time to do our jobs has come," he declared as he rose. "We will purify Madara's hollow and another Shinigami will soon be stationed here to watch over the village." As they grabbed their badges to exit their Gigai, both Shinigami froze simultaneously. "See, Captain, this spiritual pressure, it's..." Ranjaku could not finish her sentence before collapsing to her knees. Toshiro's expression hardened. "Another hollow has just arrived. This one is immensely powerful. Captain level." "What do we do, Captain?" Ranjaku had found her feet again, but was panting heavily and her breathing was strained. Toshiro did not appear to be physically affected, Hashirama observed. "We face it, as our duty demands we must. I'm calling in to have our limiters released." Hitsugaya motioned to press his Shinigami badge against his chest, but Hashirama stopped him. "Wait. I'm coming with you. Renjaku and Hitsugaya looked at him as if he had grown a second head. With all due respect, Lord Hokage, please leave this to the professionals. You cannot even see spiritual beings, anyway. Tobirama stood violently, about to defend his brother against such an insult, but Hashirama waved him down, a glint in his eye. In the time Vice Captain Matsumoto was outside her gigai, I analyzed the discrepancies between your Ryotsu and our chakra. I think I might have a way to see these spiritual beings. Hitsugaya raised an eyebrow. Suppose you can. It's still too dangerous. Hollows are extremely deadly creatures for regular humans, and this one that's just airy. That valley out there that you saw? The reason the maps of our land of fire are being redrawn? It's because of Big Brother Hashirama's battle with Madara Uchiha. Tobirama's deep voice declared. The Hidden Leaf is my village. As Hokage, I will defend it from anything that threatens it. Hashirama continued. Our village. Before Hitsugaya's eyes, Tobirama had disappeared and reappeared, now clad in blue-gray battle armor over his dark green overalls. Hitsugaya's eyes widened as he met Hashirama's now iron-hard gaze. But Takami said these were just athletic humans good at throwing knives. Before anything else could be said, a scream from the other side of their wall shattered the night. Mito! Hashirama cried, slamming the door open to see his wife squirming in pain, clutching at her stomach. He lifted her shirt to see the nine tails seal glowing. Tobirama! Get us to the valley, now! He roared. Tobirama knelt before Hashirama and Mito, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. Hold on to my shoulders, you two! He ordered. There was no time to argue or stall. These shinobi seemed to have some kind of plan, and for now, any plan was better than nothing. Nodding to Renjaku, Hitsugaya laid his palm on Tobirama's left shoulder, and Renjaku did the same on his right. In an instant, the world warped around them. Valley of the End. Hitsugaya blinked. Before them stood a black, spiky-haired man clad in red armor similar to Tobirama's, an orange-brown gunbai in his left hand, connected by a chain to a vicious-looking scythe in his right. Both weapons were brought to bear against a tanned, scantily clad blonde woman who stood before him in a casual stance. Despite their appearances, both of their Ryotsu signatures reeked of hollow. Before anybody had time to react, a mountain of white Ryotsu erupted from Hashirama. His eyes were closed, his hands clasped together and brows furrowed in concentration. As Hitsugaya watched, black markings appeared on his face, lining his eyes and forehead. Hashirama! Madara staggered back, using the end of his gunbai to help him balance. The Hokage opened his eyes, and locked them with Madara's. When Hashirama spoke, his voice was steady, but laced with such ice that even Hitsugaya felt a shiver down his spine. Madara! Release the summoning jutsu. You're hurting Mito. Valley of the End. Madara released the summoning as realization dawned. To be able to contain the Kyuubi, and resist my summoning, the Uzumaki clan's sealing jutsu is formidable indeed, he intoned. Relaxing his grip on his weapons, Madara set them down, turning away from Haribel to face Hashirama. I said you would lead the village into darkness, but to think you would seal the Kyuubi into your own wife. Hashirama took a breath to answer, but was beaten by Mito, who proudly declared, I sealed the Kyuubi within myself. Madara looked genuinely surprised at this. We all must make sacrifices in the name of peace, and becoming a Jinchuriki is the burden I chose to bear, of my own free will. Tobirama rounded on his brother and sister-in-law. You mean to say that the nine-tailed demon fox is sealed within Mito, and you didn't think to tell me? He demanded. Receiving no reply, he turned back to face Madara and the blonde woman. We shall be having words when this is over, he ground out. Hashirama shook his head and stepped forward. No. I'll explain it now. I was going to reveal it at the Cage Summit, but I should not have kept this from you, Tobirama. He then gestured to Madara, raising his voice a little. You proved to me the destructive capabilities of the tailed beasts, Madara, and it gave me an idea. With the Uzumaki clan's sealing jutsu, we can contain these tailed beasts into vessels, distributed across the elemental nations. With each nation possessing the power of a tailed beast, The threat of mutually assured destruction will bring about the true end of all conflict. The Hokage's words were brimming with hope, but Madara only shook his head. You are naive, asinine fool. Making the existence of Jinchuriki known across the elemental nations will only spark further war as each nation bargains, backstabs and betrays to obtain more tailed beasts. No, you may create a facade of peace, but peace brought about by threat of mutual destruction is merely changing the definition of war. Hashirama paused to contemplate Madara's words, and then reined in his killing intent, though the ryotsu he was radiating was still immense. Madara, you were like a brother to me. Tobirama flinched at this. Need I remind you that the Uchiha killed our brothers? Hashirama ignored the outburst. You should have stayed by my side. Even if you would never hold the title of Hokage, you know that your words hold meaning to me. And yours are as empty to me as your head must be. Madara roared. Izuna died by Tobirama's hand, and despite our truce and the establishment of the Hidden Leaf, Uchiha persecution at the hands of the Senjus has only worsened over the years. The only path to true peace is inscribed within the Uchiha stone tablet, handed down by the Sage of Six Paths himself, and without the Sharingan you will never be able to decipher it. Then decipher it for me. Come back to the Hidden Leaf, Madara, Hashirama pleaded, reaching under his breastplate and fishing out an ember necklace. He tossed it at Madara. Madara caught it deftly, and sucked in a breath of surprise. The leaf with a hole in the middle that had inspired him to name the village was there, encased in glowing, pristine amber. It was a beautiful and thoughtful use of Hashirama's wood release, but despite his skill at preserving the leaf, Madara could still see the barest shadow of a split where he had slashed the leaf in two. Why would you try to mend this? You know I slashed it as a symbol of my intentions toward you, and the village. Because I should not have been swayed by Tobirama. I should have made the feudal lords wait while I cleared the air with you first the instant I suspected you overheard him. I repaired this leaf because, to me, it is a symbol of our dreams having been fulfilled, and of the last time we laughed together. I will cherish it forever. Brother, have you gone mad? Tobirama was beside himself in disbelief. Silence, Tobirama. Do not think I was unaware of your dealings with the clan heads and feudal lords against Madara. After I thought him dead, I was content to let bygones be bygones, but you will not undermine me again. Hashirama's words left no room for argument. Tobirama suddenly felt very small. Madara stared down at the ember, his eyes were burning, and his lips were dry. Yet now I hold this symbol in my hand. He clasped his fingers around the amulet. This is an insult to our battle. You insult your own victory by keeping all these mementos of me. He gestured to his grave, and to the gigantic stone statue carved from the face of the valley. I am your enemy. His hand was trembling. Then crush it. Hashirama spoke softly. Crush it, and tell me that the dream of peace you and I shared was a lie. Tell me that, were it you who had one, you truly would have marched on the village you built with your own two hands. Nobody moved a muscle. Neither Shinigami knew what to make of the exchange, and Haribel's mind was racing at the revelation that Hashirama was as powerful as Madara. She couldn't open a Garganta and just escape, now that two Shinigami had seen both Madara and herself, but could she really beat all the people here on her own? The seconds that ticked by felt like minutes as Madara held the amulet a bit longer, before finally tossing it back at Hashirama. I am dead, Hashirama. I am a hollow. There is nothing I can do for you, now. That's not true. Hashirama argued, these guys here, he motioned at Hitsugaya and Matsumoto, are Shinigami. They're spiritual entities like yourself, and they can use artificial bodies called Gigai to interact with the living world. Now it was Hitsugaya's turn to be outraged. Have you absorbed nothing of what we just told you? He is a hollow. You cannot reason with a hollow. I am reasoning with a hollow at this very moment. Hashirama stated, matter-of-factly. Madara is also clearly not a white monster with a tail, and also has his memories intact. Forgive me for wanting to believe an old friend of decades over two strangers I met only hours ago, he finished coldly. Rinjuku took this opportunity to ask a pressing question she had. Hey Hokage, I get that you used some fancy technique to be able to see hollows and all, but how are they able to see and hear them? She gestured at Obrama and Mito. I'm sharing some of my nature chakra with them. In fact, you could say I'm sharing some of your Ryotsu that I've gathered using Sage Mode. Hashirama explained. Rinjaku nodded dumbly. He had essentially explained nothing as far as she was concerned, but she was glad he seemed confident in himself despite the situation. It was then that Madara recognized the two strangers. It's those Shinigami when I was first here. Madara closed his eyes and tilted his head backward, feeling the cold night air seeping through the holes in his hollow mask, tickling his skin below. He could not believe his misfortune. Between this Shinigami woman who had overpowered his original hollow form, Haribel behind him, and both Hashirama and Obrama, Madara knew this was the end of the road. There was no point putting up some pathetic show of resistance with his chakra completely depleted. If he had to die, he would do so with his pride intact. As much as I would like to see the tablet again, I don't believe your new friends over there or Haribel here are willing to just let me go. Madara sighed. Then they can hear my words and heed them well. Haribel was already focused on Hashirama, so he glanced sideways at the Shinigami, and then at Obrama, making sure he had their attention. Madara is coming with me. You can follow if you must, but I will not tolerate any move against him. Toshiro Hitsugaya had enough. Lord Hokage, I truly must apologize for imposing ourselves on you so suddenly, but the laws of the Suriite are very clear in situations like these. The hollows must be purified, for the greater good of all. He slammed his Shinigami badge against his chest, exiting his Gigai and flexing his Ryotsu. Renjaku, you take Madara. I'll handle the other one. Sit upon the frozen heavens, Hyorin Maru. He cried, unleashing his Shikai and taking off toward Haribel in a shunpo. Before he could register what had happened, his face was buried in the dirt, and he found himself pinned to the ground by an enormous weight on his neck. When he tried to bring Hyorin Maru to and slash at it, he found that he could not move, something had trapped each of his limbs in place. He opened his mouth to speak but only managed to inhale a cloud of dust instead. Coughing, he saw in his peripheral vision what appeared to be thick, snaking tree roots tightly coiled around his sword arm, and assumed his other appendages were similarly bound. Renjaku, who had also left her Gigai, had found herself disarmed, on her knees, with both arms firmly held behind her back. The cold edge of a kunai was pressed against her exposed neck. I may not always agree with my brother's words, but you are in the jurisdiction of Konohagakure, in the land of fire. It doesn't matter where you are from, here, the Hokage's word is law. Obrama announced, raising his voice from behind Rinjaku so that Hitsugaya could hear, too. Do not insult us further than you already have. Just who are you people? Hitsugaya demanded, recovering from his coughing fit. He was well and truly pinned. There are two hollows right in front of you and you decide to attack us? The blonde one is incredibly powerful. I'm the only one here who see his rend was cut short by a slight tightening of the root around his neck, not enough to cause any harm, but more than enough to warn him into silence. Having well and truly exhausted Hashirama's goodwill, he was completely ignored. Instead, the Hokage turned toward Haribel. She had drawn her sword now in response to Hitsugaya's charge, but now held it in a half stance, unsure how she should react. She fought the urge to take a step back as Hashirama slowly walked towards her, a smile on his face. As you've no doubt heard by now, I am Hashirama Senju, the Hokage of the Hidden Leaf Village. And who might you be, young lady? He stopped before her, introducing himself with a hand on his chest, his other hand extended in greeting. Dear Haribel, Espada number 3. She sheathed Tiburon and cautiously shook the proffered hand. She kept eye contact with Hashirama as he frowned, looked at her hand, back up to her eyes, then down to her hand again. Only then did Haribel notice Hashirama was furiously kneading her hand with his fingers. What are you doing? She asked. Nothing. Hashirama stammered, blushing as he noticed what he was doing. Your hand, it's as hard as steel. Forgive me, I've just never felt skin so solid before, ha ha ha. He laughed as he rubbed the back of his head with his free hand, still holding on to their handshake despite Haribel having let go already. She said, annoyed that, once again, she was lost for words. Luckily, a closed fan smacked the Hokage on the back of his head, and he released her hand to massage the spot. Get out of the lady's personal space, will you? Mito chided, unimpressed at the proximity her husband had to the revealingly dressed blonde. Madara laughed in genuine mirth for the first time since he had left the village. Haribel was strong, and was certainly a dangerous foe, but she didn't look like she wanted to fight at the moment. Moments ago he was prepared to be cut down, and now Hashirama had just been caught shamelessly caressing Haribel's hand. He just couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Hashirama had always possessed the unique ability to switch between an utter clown and a force of nature at the drop of a hat. You may be interested to know, Hashirama, Madara said, that Haribel's skin is so hard that when I try to kick a broken piece of your sword through her side, the blunt end stabbed back through my greaves. Hashirama's eyes widened at that, before he schooled his features. Ah, so did Haribel here beat you up that badly? Your chakra is so weak it's almost undetectable, when you broke my sword? He jabbed an accusatory finger at Madara. I was wondering where that went. That katana was handed down through my family for generations. Madara turned away at that. Look, it's a long story. I'll explain later. When he did not elaborate further, Hashirama spoke again, I'll hold you to that. When Obrama's flying Raijin brought us in, it looked like you two were just about to go another round. He locked gazes with Haribel again, this time the mirth absent from his features. Are we going to have a problem? Haribel had never been one for intricate plans and schemes. She obeyed Aizen because he had given her the power to protect her fraction, and didn't do much to pass the years except wander around Weko Mundo, protecting the Odd Hollow from an untimely death. She supposed she could stay here and see how things played out. She could retreat through a Garganta at any time, after all, and she may as well gather as much intel as she could on these powerful beings. No, she replied, after a pause. Madara tested a fire technique and accidentally hurt my subordinates. We fought briefly, but for now I am content to simply observe. Hashirama's features softened to a smile again. Now that's a story I definitely want to hear. He turned and pointed toward Konoha. Come, then, walk with me and let us go read this tablet that Madara is so eager to see again. You have caused no harm since your arrival, Haribel, so I shall treat you as a guest of the Hidden Leaf Village unless you give me reason otherwise. He took a few steps, then suddenly turned back toward Madara. Also, just how long are you going to keep wearing that creepy mask? Madara faced. I'm a hollow, Hashirama, the mask is part of me now, let's go. I'll explain what I can on the way. A few minutes after the shinobi and hollow's footsteps faded into the distance, an utterly flabbergasted Hitsugaya whispered, Renjaku, hey Renjaku, are you still here? Right here, Captain. Her bubbly voice instantly sounded above his ear. She had expertly positioned herself just out of sight of his peripheral vision. How long have you been standing here, Renjaku? Hitsugaya sighed. Well, right after Tobrama released me. I thought it would be fun to see how long it took before you called for help. There was a slight pause as she checked her soul pager. 3 minutes and 41 seconds. And I thought it would be at least 5. Get serious, Matsumoto, and get me out of these stupid roots. We have authorization to release our limiters. Yeah, I can't believe how fast the singes were. Renjaku said as she chopped at the root binding her captain's sword hand. Once it was freed, she got started on the one around his neck. Hitsugaya's soul pager rang. As the captain was still restrained, Renjaku fished it out of his shakusho instead, sucking in a sharp gasp as he saw the caller. It's the captain commander, she said as she picked up the call and placed it in front of Hitsugaya. Captain Hitsug, what happened to you? Explain yourself. The head captain demanded. Toshiro Hitsugaya, captain of the 10th Division, had his right cheek squished against the ground, and a thick brown root forming a semicircle around his neck was locking his head in place. As such, the soul pager displayed his profile sideways. With as much dignity as he could muster, Hitsugaya took a breath, Careful not to inhale any dust this time. Long story, but I'm fine. We were caught off guard by how powerful the residents of this world are, but now that our limiters have been released, everything will be under control, sir. He reported. Do not get cocky, Captain Hitsuga. I have received Vice Captain Matsumoto's distress call mentioning two human-like hollows with Zanpakuto. This is not the first time we have encountered such creatures. They are known as Renka-er, or Shinigami hollow hybrids. I am sending you some classified information regarding an event 100 years ago that led to the defection and disappearance of 6 captains as well as the commander and vice commander of the Kido Corps. Captains Komamura, Kenpachi, Tosen and Aizen have been dispatched to assist you in the capture of these Renka-er. Hold your position until they arrive, and review these documents well. Do not fail to apprehend the Renka-er. They are extremely deadly, but must be captured alive if they are to reveal where the others have been hiding. That's it. Please comment for a part 2.